There we go. Oh, by the way, you know our church is all about God, people, and community. And so there are times where even spur of the moment, where occasionally we hear about situations of people that need help, and we mention it to you, and you guys are great. And so it was 2 or 3 weeks ago that we mentioned that we just knew of some situations with parapros and some other people that have really been struggling financially during this time of not having school and not being paid. And so I just mentioned it to you, and you guys gave $1,200 on that love offering. You've been in my office the whole time, Gerard? You've been asleep? Okay. Well, at least you come out for the message. So I just want you to know that that money has been distributed to people that really needed it. And so I want to thank you for all of that so much. Well, it is really important that we do this series. Our small groups are starting. Probably it'll be next week. Actually, we're going to have the kickoff tonight, and we're concerned now with impending possible weather that we're not going to have our kickoff group, small groups tonight. The meeting, we're going to have that after church Sunday morning, next Sunday morning. And by the way, I want to tell you that the Michigan Singers are coming next Sunday night, and Mr. Forsman and I originally, we were, the dates were kind of mixed up, and so I was thinking it was a little later on, but it's actually next Sunday night. But this stage will be full of young people from all over Michigan that'll be singing, and that's at 6 o'clock. And please be here, bring some friends. It's just always an uplifting time. So that's next Sunday night, the Michigan Singers. But we're going to spend the next several weeks together talking about what the Bible says about God and who God really is. Because as you know, there's a lot of confusion about that, maybe more than ever. And I'm going to let you hear the words of actually someone who's confused about it. And these days you hear a lot of like the universe is God and we are the universe, and it's very so impersonal. Just like we become the universe. All of this talk, and so. I'm not even going to mention his name. I'm just going to play you a clip. But this guy basically just teaches that, we are an organism that basically we ourselves are God, we ourselves are divine, and really the whole world, all of the existence is about us, and it revolves around us, and we are like a piece of God, and then we just kind of grow into the universe and grow into God. And this came centuries ago from a teaching that started with this idea that some would say that when the Creator created the universe, then later on the Creator decided to be the universe. And so there wasn't like God as we know it, but then we are the center point of the universe. So this is just a quick clip. Or a long clip.
But in the mythology that we've sold ourselves on during the end of the 19th century, when people discovered how big the universe was, and that we live on a little planet in a solar system on the edge of a galaxy, which is a minor galaxy, everybody thought, we're really unimportant after all. God isn't there and doesn't love us. And we put ourselves down, see? But actually, it's this little funny microbe tiny thing crawling on this little planet that's way out somewhere,
That's us.
who has the ingenuity, by nature of this magnificent organic structure, to evoke the whole universe out of what would otherwise be mere quanta. There's jazz going on. But you see, this little ingenious organism is not merely some stranger in this. This little organism on this little planet is what the whole show is growing there.
Okay, so he is saying that we as the simple organism that, has become very complex, but we are what the whole show is about. It's about us. So the common way of looking at God today is reducing God into something or someone that you really can't personally know, but instead we become God. And so the smaller we can make God, the bigger we become. And A.W. Tozer, a great author, writer, theologian, totally disagreed with this in his lifetime. And he said that what we believe about God is the most important thing about us. We tend, by a secret law of the soul, to move toward our mental image of God. So if we have this idea that God is somehow the universe and that we can become God, then that is totally going to change the way we look at ourselves, the way we look at others, the way we view life. And it's not just that. I mean, throughout my growing up years, it wasn't that people talked about the universe, but people made God small by trying to make God out like a man. Like people said, well, God, is like the old man upstairs. And so basically it's just like a bigger version of people. Or God is like Santa Claus, who, can be nice as long as we're nice, but when he goes and looks on the naughty and nice list, if you're naughty, you're going to get in trouble, and God, Santa's not going to be nice to you. Or God's like a divine heavenly vending machine. If you pull the right levers, you get something good, and if you pull the wrong levers, you get like licorice yellow sticks and weird stuff. And so people have reduced God, or either magnified self. And so Tozer says, look, however it is that you feel about God, and some of you struggle with this. Maybe you had a very, very, very bad father. So you struggle with this idea of God because God is referred to as a heavenly Father. So again, however, if we have an incorrect viewpoint of who God is, it really is going to mess with everything about us. Now, let me just state, there are some similarities. We are created in God's image. So there are some similarities. Let's not get that wrong. For instance, God is merciful, and we can be merciful. God is faithful, and so can we be. We can be loving. We can be truthful. We can be patient. And there are other things that we can be similar to God, and only because God has put that in us. But it's God's nature that started it, and not ours. And on our best day of mercy, and on our best day of being faithful and loving and truthful and patient, we don't come close to God. But, let's just, Bible does say we are created in His image, but this is as far as it goes. There are just similarities. But in reality, we are 100% not like God. And at the beginning of this series where we're talking about trying to define God in a biblical way, I just thought it would be important for us to start with saying, we're not like Him. Theologians sometimes will make long lists, big words of how we are not like God. We are not immeasurable. For instance, we are not self-existent. God exists by Himself, doesn't need any other help. We are not self-sufficient. God is. We are not We are not the creator. We are not all present. We're not everywhere. We're not unchanging. We are not incomprehensible, but God is. God is all-knowing. God is timeless, and God is all-powerful. These are all things that only God is, and these are things that we are not. And that person that I played the clip of earlier would be offended by that, by this picture, these statements. And more and more and more, our culture gets offended at the thought that we are not the end-all of everything. What I want to do in the remainder of this time together is I want to pull out three of those things that only God is. And I want to talk about them just briefly because I believe that they will matter. However it is we feel about these things will matter how we live life. Listen, God is immeasurable. So the day that we were born, it was determined that we were not God. Why? Because like within minutes of being born, they got out the measuring devices. They got out the measuring tape, and they got out the scales, and we could be measured, which means that we are finite, which means that we are limited. It was decided on that day that we were not God. The funny thing is about us is we absolutely love to measure, and it's not a bad thing, but we measure everything. We measure hair loss or hair quantities. I mean, those of us that are follically challenged, we measure these things. We measure the amount of gas that's in our car. We measure the number of steps, some of you, that you take in a day. We just love to measure. We're all about measuring, and that's not a bad thing. That's just how we exist and how we communicate and how we get through life. We are measuring people. And so perhaps that is part of the frustration that the one who made this audio earlier has. And maybe that's part of the frustration that sometimes you have with God, because we can't measure God. And so in Isaiah, he says in 40:12, like, who among us has measured the waters in the hollow of his or her hand? You know what the hollow of our hand is? It's like if you would just shape the palm of your hand like a cup. That's the hollow of the hand. And Scripture is saying that God is so immeasurably big that he can even be big enough for the palm of his hand to fit all of the waters of the world, the rivers and the streams and the ocean, in the hollow of his hand. And God can measure because he's that big. That's how immeasurable he is. And when it says, who among you can do that, it is screaming out, you can't, because you're not God. Or with the breadth, the width, with the breadth of his hand, God has been able to mark off the heavens. God's hand is so big that the heavens and the universe can be mapped out on his very hand, symbolically speaking. But God's hand is so big that it could, foot by foot, mile by mile, be marked off on his hand. And it says, Who among you is so big that you could hold the dust, all the dirt and all the sand in the world in a basket and be able to hold that? I mean, who could do that? And who among you, human beings, has been able to weigh the mountains on the scales and the hills in a balance? Who among you, human beings, is so big and expensive and immeasurable that you have the wisdom and the ability to weigh the mountains and the hills and to keep it all in a balance? And John, I'll have to talk to you about this someday, but I think this is talking about just the balance of the world and the weight of the world and the way the earth spins on an axis, if it's true. See, the earth is weighted perfectly. And it is saying that there is a God. I can't even get my tires balanced without help. You should see me, not doing that, of course, but just trying to get air in my tires correctly. Because I've lost that little gauge. I suppose I could buy one. But I've lost the gauge, and so my car, the dashboard tells me how much air I've got in each tire. But you have to flip through it to get it on the right tire. And so it'll say negative 50 air, whatever, on the one tire. And not really, but so it says it's low. And I have to put $1.50 in the machine. And it goes, and it comes on. And then I have to run to the tire and put in the air. And Denise is in the car pushing the button. I should really buy one of those things. Pushing the button because it resets. And then she'll say 35, 37, oh, now it's 49, you got to let some out. I can't even do that. But God is able to weigh out the mountains. So we live in a world that says, you know what, we are so increasingly becoming God. But we can't even figure out our tires right. And this verse is screaming, God is big and you are not. So I'm just going to sum this up. Who has measured everything? God. Who has measured God? Nobody. He is immeasurable. You know what our struggle is with the whole thing of measuring and why this world wants to measure everything, including God? Because that which we can measure determines that which we feel we can control. And so if somehow God can be measurable, we somehow feel we can control him. And so the world today would, you can take one of two viewpoints. The fact that God is immeasurable can make you mad and say, I refuse to believe that I am so tiny that I can be measured and that I am so tiny that I can't, that I have to struggle with, how much chocolate goes in this and butter and this, and I have to set my timer to make sure I get. I refuse to believe that I'm that tiny because I can handle life and I won't bow to anybody. Or you could say, you know what? That kind of comforts me to know that God is immeasurable, and I'm not. So here's the second one. God is not only immeasurable, but God is the creator. And only God is creator. See, if you struggle with the fact that God can't be measured because it makes you feel small, this one's really going to bother you. Because we say, man, but I am really significant in these certain areas. I mean, you look at me at work, and you look at my resume, and you look at the things that I am able to skillfully accomplish. There are things that I totally excel in, and I'm very good, thank you, at those. We feel really good. I'm not saying we should feel bad about ourselves, but it needs to all be within reason. But we get to thinking like we're just all that, and we're so amazing, and we create so well. What the scripture is saying is, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And this isn't just saying that God was the creator of the world, but what this is really pointing out and screaming to us is that this is a creator. He is the true and only creator because he created everything out of nothing. That's what this is saying. In the beginning, there were no heavens and there was no earth. But God, from nothing, created it all. And this is why only God is the true creator. We say, oh, I am the creator. I mean, you look at the buildings I've built, or you look at the things that I've been able to make in my life. You look at all the woodwork I can do. I create things. Truth is, you are only creative. You're not the creator. And nor am I. None of us have been able to create something from nothing. We all had to have something to work with. And so this is why in the book of Psalms, they're so completely blown away with this fact. It says, Lord, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations, and before the mountains were born. See, before there was anything, you brought forth the whole world. From everlasting to everlasting, you are God. Everlasting is a big God word that you and I aren't. Everlasting means always. So the truth is, none of us are creators, we're only creative. And God is the only true creator. So if you're getting offended, you can probably get more offended because not only are you small compared to God, but you haven't done anything without the help of something. And the something all comes from God. God is, we'll get to this point in a minute, but God is always to always, which is the next one we'll get to in just a second, but God is timeless. God uniquely is so big and expansive that he exists in another dimension or reality that we can't even understand, that is above time and space. And so for God to always be, always have been, and always will be, this means that even though you and I have lived in the past and experienced the past, we don't live there now. We live in the present. But God, in a dimension that's bigger than time and space, lives in the past. And God, of course, lives in the present, but God lives in tomorrow. There is no tomorrow for you and I, because when tomorrow comes, it's today only. When today turns into tomorrow, it's still today. But with God, there is this dimension where there truly is future, and God is there from everlasting, always to always. And it's bigger than us because there's nothing about us that is always or never. Whenever we use those words like you are always or you are never, that makes us mad instantly in communication because none of us are consistent enough to be always or never. Because we're human beings. But God is everlasting to everlasting. So, again, just quickly, God's different than an artist who creates. He's different than a musician or poet or chef who creates. And that artist and poet, musician and chef must come to the point where all of us say, we must all confess, I am because he is. And only God can say, I am who I am. So we're going to wrap this up now with one more thought. That God is so big that he lives and exists in another dimension that we cannot. That he is the God of the past, the present, and the future. So if you're kind of on the being offended side, it's probably going to continue. I mean, when we say that God is immeasurable, that might be offensive to you because that says that you are measurable and therefore you are small compared to God. And when we say that God is the creator, that is saying that you haven't created anything. You're only creative. And that might be offensive to you. On the other hand, being immeasurable and creator might actually make us feel good about that whole equation. But if you're getting offended, for sure you're going to get offended now because timeless means that God is so big that not only the past and the present and the future are there, but God is able to handle them all, and it's no problem. And you and I can't even know or handle 1 second beyond now without actually going through it. I mean, we can't determine even 1 second beyond now. We can't plan on that. So the offense might continue. Now, here's where I think the author, the one who made that statement earlier on that I played, and this is where, honestly, even if you're a believer and you have no issues with what we're talking about so far, I mean, let's be honest. If we're saying that God is so big that he's immeasurable, and God alone is the creator, and God is so amazing with time that he can work things out, this is the point that even if you're totally in agreement with this, you still might say, but in all honesty, it seems that in my life, God has lost track of time. It seems that life just kind of happens at whatever time it chooses. And that is frustrating. Some of you are totally good with God being immeasurable and you being small. That might even be comforting to you. Some of you are okay with the fact that God alone creates and you don't. In fact, it even kind of makes you feel like it takes some weight off of you. But yet, we all have struggled with, if God is so big and he is so great at creating, why did he not show up and then you name a date and an event? And we struggle with it, though, because there's still this truth. I'm reading this book by Jen Wilkin, where she says, God exists outside of time. The past holds for him no missed opportunity. The present holds for him no anxiety. The future holds for him no uncertainty. He is never early nor late. Now, do you struggle with that? He is never subject to the tyranny of a deadline. And you say, oh, how I wish he was. Because I put deadlines out there. Yes, I do. And God is never in a hurry, but oh, how we wish he would. And he's never playing catch up with a schedule that has gotten out of control. Is God somehow so big that even the disagreements that we have with his timelessness somehow there's a reason for it, and it somehow works. And we say, okay, well, how about this passage, these two passages, Ecclesiastes 3:1, where it says, there's a time for everything, or 3:11, where it says, he has made everything beautiful in its time. Well, God, I can show you where the time wasn't right. And God, I can show you things in my life where it wasn't beautiful. So how do I figure that out? I want to believe that you're immeasurable, and I do. And I'm okay with the fact that you're the creator. But I struggle with this point, God, that you know everything about time, and yet you missed it. You see, we expect God to make everything beautiful. According to our time. You see, we don't want to believe that we are the universe and that we are so big that we become God. We actually say as believers, we want a God. We want a God who's big. We want a God who can create, but yet somehow we feel that we've got the time thing figured out. And we say, you want to talk about Ecclesiastes, the time thing? Well, listen, the time to heal is anytime someone is sick. And the time to be silent is when I'm done speaking my mind. And the time to die is at the end of a full life and not a moment before. I'm okay with the immeasurable, and I'm okay with the creator, but I struggle with the time thing. God, if you're timeless, then why don't you do a better job? I want to just briefly give you some observations now in just a few seconds. And I'll come back to that in a moment. But first, when it says, when the truth of God is that he is immeasurable, this is a good thing. I mean, you might be offended by that. You might be offended that God is immeasurably big and you are measurably small. That might be offensive to you, but I think it's a good thing because God has no rivals, and frankly, the rivals that are in my life, whether it be people or health or money or situations, none of those rivals can compare to God because he's immeasurable. I need a God like that. And I like the fact that God is immeasurable because Ephesians 3:20 is possible, which says that God is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine. You need a God who's able to go off of the measuring stick to be able to do the things in your life. And let's talk about creator. I know that might be offensive. It might be offensive to say to you that you've never created one thing in your life, that you have to have help from God to do anything. But yet, the whole idea about God being the creator is that it can work great strides to our humility, and that we can be freed from the delusion of our own self-importance. And frankly, we need a God who can create something out of nothing. We need a God who's much bigger than just a glorified version of man or woman. We need a God who can create in our life out of nothing. And so, let's talk about timeless just for a moment. And I approach this one with delicacy. Because I know that this one comes with heartfelt emotions. Because I know that some of you, many of you, all of us, but some of you more, have struggled with, why did this have to happen? It was such a bad time. I can't understand why that had to happen. But the reality is, and what I rest in, is that God in his immeasurability, and God in his being able to create something out of nothing, and God who is so big that he is beyond our comprehension of schedule and timing, that God has a time and a plan that is infinitely better than had it happened when we thought it should. Whatever it is that went wrong in your life, whatever it is that caused you tears because God didn't show up at that time, I believe that God is so infinitely big that there is a time that it is beautiful, that he will make it beautiful, more beautiful than had it all worked out when you thought it should. Because the truth is, if things would always work out the way we think it should, in God's great plan and understanding, it would not been as good as if when and how God wanted to do it. There's a better plan, and there's a better time for that which hasn't worked out well for you. Okay, this writer that I'm talking about, Jen Wilkins, she says, sometimes it takes more than one lifetime for the ugly to be made beautiful. We may go to our graves without seeing the wicked receive their due. We may be laid to rest without finding forgiveness from a loved one. We may die without seeing the resolution of our own plot line, whispering with our final breaths that we do not understand. But yet, the teaching in the rest of the book was that she was saying, while that is true, it is also true that it often takes more than this life to make all things beautiful. And whatever did not go as planned for you in this life, someday will be beautiful. It just took more time. God is not like us, and I'm okay with it. I'm going to ask Abby to come and sing a song. If we could just stay in this worshipful mode. I'm going to ask her just to sing a song that says, you know, your soul's okay. It is well. It is well. It is well in the hands of an immeasurable God. It is well in the hands of a God who can create something out of nothing. And even for those things that did not work out within what seems to be your timing, even those, it is well. God's going to make it well.